In the bitter cold of winter, when the world is blanketed in snow, a Native American man faces an ancient challenge: how to move firewood without succumbing to the freezing winds that could kill in mere hours. Guided by the wisdom of his ancestors, he turns to the earth itself for protection, a simple yet ingenious solution that has kept his people safe for centuries. Before we begin, share where you're watching from. And if the ancient ways of survival resonate with you, subscribe, because the next story holds secrets far older than this one. The wind howled across the Great Plains, carrying a bitter chill that cut through even the thickest layers of fur. Snow had arrived early, covering the earth with a heavy blanket of white. The sky above, dull and gray, promised a storm unlike any Conti had seen before. The land, vast and unforgiving, was quiet now, as though bracing itself for the coming winter's fury. Conti, a man of 35 winters, stood just outside his lodge. His breath formed clouds in the cold air, and his sharp eyes scanned the horizon. The cold had a sharp bite this season, but this was not the first winter his people had faced. They had endured many before, but this one felt different. He could sense it in the wind, in the way the trees bent under the weight of the snow, in the uneasy quiet that had settled over the village. His people were prepared in their own ways. Furs were piled high, food stores checked, and firewood stacked in abundance. But Conti had prepared something different, something no one else in the village had thought of. While others hurried to finish their cabins and stockpile supplies, Conti had spent the past few months digging into the hillside. He was building an earth tunnel. The earth tunnel was simple, nothing more than a long passageway, carefully carved into the earth, its walls lined with thick soil. It was designed to keep him and his supplies safe from the cold winds that would soon tear through the village. It wasn't fancy, but it would work. The earth had always been his greatest teacher. He had learned, from his elders and through his own experiences, that survival didn't come from fighting the land, it came from understanding it. And the earth, with its deep warmth, would protect him from the deadly cold. As Conti stood at the edge of his village, the wind picking up around him, he thought of the old ways. His father had often spoken of the importance of listening to the land, of respecting its power. Conti had learned to read the signs of the seasons, to know when to gather food, when to seek shelter, and when to wait. This year, the storm would come with a force that would test even the best prepared. And Conti was ready not just with the wood and furs that others had, but with the knowledge that the earth itself would be his shield. Turning back to the earth tunnel, Conti felt the weight of his ancestors' wisdom settle around him. It was a simple thing, his earth tunnel, but it would carry him through this harsh winter. It would carry the people, too, as soon as they understood its power. The cold winds would blow, but inside the earth there would be warmth. The earth had spoken, and Conti was listening. Conti sat cross-legged in his lodge, the fire crackling softly as the winds howled outside. The village was quiet, save for the occasional murmur of voices and the sounds of preparations for the winter storm that was now inevitable. Conti's hands, calloused from years of work, were still as he stared into the flames. His thoughts drifted back to the lessons of his youth, to the days when his father had taught him not just how to survive, but how to truly live with the land. As a boy, Conti had been taught to listen. His father, a man of great wisdom, had often said, "The earth speaks in whispers, my son. If you listen with your heart, you will hear its lessons." Conti had never truly understood those words until now. His father had taken him into the woods as a child, showing him the paths where the trees grew thick and tall, where the streams ran swift and clear. It was there that Conti had first learned the importance of the land's natural rhythms. One lesson had stuck with him above all. Survival was not about strength or force. It was about understanding the land, working with it rather than against it. The tribes of old had mastered this knowledge, not through brute strength, but through deep observation. They knew where to find shelter, where the winds would be most biting, and where the snow would drift the heaviest. That was why Conti had turned to the earth itself to protect his firewood. He had seen the designs of the elders, how their homes were built close to the earth, how the cold never seemed to reach them as fiercely as it reached others. The earth was a constant source of warmth and shelter. Conti knew this because he had learned from it over many years of living in harmony with the land. The earth tunnel was not a new idea. His people had used similar methods for generations. But Conti had refined the design, ensuring it would serve his needs. He had dug the tunnel deep into the hillside, where the earth's natural warmth would shield him from the winter's worst. It would be a place to store firewood, a place to retreat when the storm became too fierce. Inside, the temperature would remain steady, safe from the biting winds and freezing temperatures outside. As Conti thought of his father's teachings, he realized that this simple tunnel was more than just a practical shelter. It was a symbol of what his people had always known. Survival came from balance, from working with the land instead of fighting it. The earth tunnel was a return to those ancient practices, a way of living that allowed him to endure what the land would throw at him. The storm was coming, but with the earth tunnel, Conti was ready. He knew that as long as he honored the land would honor him in return. The teachings of his ancestors had guided him here, and they would carry him through the winter's fury. As the snow began to fall heavier, Conti stood at the entrance of the earth tunnel, gazing into the depths of the hillside. The work had taken longer than he expected, but now the tunnel was nearly complete. The heavy snowfall would come quickly, but Conti had prepared the tunnel with careful thought. This was his innovation, his way of listening to the land and shaping it to serve him. No one else in the village had thought of it, and his neighbors had often mocked his cautiousness. His father had always said, "The land will test you, my son, but it will always reward those who respect it." Conti had trusted those words. The earth held its secrets, and its lessons were not always easy. The village, with its cabins built swiftly and without care, would not withstand the intensity of the storm soon to arrive. But his earth tunnel, built with patience and respect, would survive. The tunnel was simple, yet its design reflected Conti's understanding of the land's natural forces. He had carefully chosen the spot on the hillside where the earth was thick and solid, the perfect place for shelter. Most people built their homes on flat land, where the snow piled high and the wind howled through every crack. But Conti knew that nature's protection came from the earth itself. By digging into the hillside, the tunnel would use the land's natural insulation to keep the warmth trapped inside. Inside the tunnel, Conti had created small niches to store firewood, ensuring that it would remain dry throughout the long winter. He had lined the walls with stones, placing them strategically to help direct heat toward the center of the tunnel. The air would stay still, insulated by the layers of earth surrounding it. Even when the cold winds raged outside, the tunnel would remain a refuge, a place of warmth, of safety. As Conti stepped into the tunnel, he felt the difference immediately. The temperature inside was noticeably warmer, and the air felt heavy, rich with the earth's deep heat. It was a sensation of peace, a feeling that had always followed him when he was close to the land. He had done this work alone, but as he stood there now, he felt the presence of his ancestors guiding him, reminding him of the old ways. They had known that to survive, one must live as a part of the land, not above it. The earth tunnel was not just a physical structure, it was a connection, a bridge between past and future. It was a way of honoring the lessons passed down through generations. While others scrambled to finish their cabins and prepare for the storm, Conti had spent his time in silence, listening to the whispers of the earth. And now, as the winds began to howl, he knew he had built something that would keep him and his people safe. His neighbors still did not understand. They called him a fool for working slowly, for overbuilding when there was no immediate need. But Conti knew that survival was not about the present moment, it was about preparing for the future. He had listened to the land, and now, in the warmth of his earth tunnel, he could feel its protection. By the time Conti finished stacking his firewood in the earth tunnel, the first gust of the coming blizzard had already swept across the village. The wind was sharp and biting, making the simple act of stepping outside feel like an assault. Yet Conti felt a calmness settle over him as he gazed at the swirling snow. His tunnel was ready, its shelter now prepared to withstand the storm. Conti's neighbors, still busy securing their cabins and making last-minute preparations, cast occasional glances in his direction. They had grown quiet in recent weeks, no longer mocking his carefulness, but instead whispering about him behind closed doors. They didn't understand, not yet. They couldn't see that the Earth Tunnel was more than just a shelter. It was a way to connect with the land's deep wisdom. As the storm intensified, Conti began his work, stepping into the swirling snow with determination. He needed more firewood, enough to last through the night and the many days that would follow. The blizzard was not a storm to be underestimated. His earth tunnel would keep the firewood dry, and the heat inside would remain constant, but he needed to gather more. The wind howled louder now, the snow thickening with each passing moment, reducing visibility to mere feet. Conti paused for a moment, adjusting the heavy load of firewood on his back. His breath formed clouds in the cold air. The village seemed far away now, hidden beneath the veil of snow. But Conti was not worried. He knew the land. He understood how to navigate it in storms like this, how to trust his instincts and the lessons passed down from his ancestors. With every step, he thought of his father's words, "Respect the storm, and it will not take." The storm was testing him now, just as it had tested his people for centuries. But he wasn't fighting it. He was moving with it, understanding its rhythms. He knew that if he fought against the storm, if he tried to outrun it, the cold would take him. But if he let it sweep over him, respecting its power, he would be fine. As he made his way back toward the tunnel, the wind picked up and the snow stung his face. But the earth tunnel, already a sanctuary, awaited him. The thick walls of earth would trap the warmth he had brought with him, and the firewood would remain dry. He could already imagine the warmth radiating from the stone inside, the fire crackling in the hearth. Conti entered the tunnel, his body finally shielded from the storm. He laid the firewood down, his movements slow but sure. The warmth inside was immediate, and as he stood for a moment to gather his thoughts, he realized something. This tunnel, simple, unadorned, was more than just shelter. It was a statement. It was a defiance of the chaos outside. While the storm raged, he and his people would be safe. Outside, the storm howled with fury. But inside the earth tunnel, the warmth of the fire and the earth was enough. The first test had come, and Conti had passed. The wind seemed to grow louder with each passing hour, its fury relentless against the village. Conti sat in the warm, dim light of his earth tunnel, watching the snow fall in thick, swirling drifts outside. The warmth of the fire wrapped around him like a comforting cloak, its crackling sound the only thing breaking the storm's deep silence. As he sat, he could hear the distant howls of the wind, the snow's heavy weight settling onto the land. But within the earth tunnel, there was peace. Outside, the village struggled. Neighbors, still not accustomed to the full force of the storm, worked hastily to secure their homes. Some had already begun to move firewood indoors. Others tended to the small details, trying to prepare for the coming days. The air was tense, filled with a quiet urgency. Yet Conti did not rush. He knew that rushing against the storm would only invite defeat. His time was spent inside the tunnel, where the earth had shielded him from the worst of the cold. But as he listened to the storm's growing intensity, Conti knew that the test was far from over. The village was not yet safe, and many would not understand the wisdom of the earth tunnel until the storm had passed. He could feel the weight of their doubt, though they spoke little of it now. He had seen it in their eyes when they mocked him earlier. But now, as the storm battered their homes, Conti felt a quiet vindication. The earth tunnel, though simple in its design, was proving itself invaluable. As the night deepened, the winds howled louder. Conti stepped outside for a moment to check on the village, though the thick snow and near-zero visibility made it nearly impossible to see. The storm seemed to surround him, but he knew the land. He had learned to feel its moods, to move with its rhythms. The harsh winds cut at his face, but he knew that the tunnel would still be there, sheltering him from the cold. Conti's thoughts turned to the others. Many would struggle through this storm, their cabins likely no match for the force of the wind. He could already hear their voices in his mind, their laughter and dismissive remarks about his earth tunnel. They didn't understand. They thought he was over-preparing, worrying about a storm that might pass like so many others. But Conti knew better. He had learned long ago that survival was not just about preparing for the immediate danger, it was about preparing for the worst. He returned to the tunnel, pulling the heavy door shut behind him. The warmth inside seemed even more precious now, a quiet sanctuary from the storm outside. Conti sat beside the fire, his face illuminated by the glow. His eyes, once filled with uncertainty, now held a quiet certainty. The storm was fierce, but it was not something to fear. The earth had taught him that. It had taught him to move with nature, to anticipate the unexpected. The earth tunnel was not just a structure, it was a symbol of resilience. Outside the storm raged, but within the earth tunnel there was only warmth. The storm had reached its peak by the second night, howling across the plains with an intensity that seemed to shake the very earth. Snow fell in sheets, blanketing the world in a thick, suffocating silence. The village was now completely enveloped, the outlines of the cabins barely visible through the thick flurries. The cold was unbearable for most, but inside the earth tunnel, Conti sat comfortably, watching the flames dance in the hearth. For a moment, Conti allowed himself to rest, closing his eyes and listening to the fire crackle. It was peaceful here, a quiet refuge in the midst of chaos. But as the storm roared on, Conti knew he could not remain idle for long. His people would need him. The cold had claimed more than just firewood, it had claimed lives, even in the villages that had prepared the best they could. Those who lacked proper shelter, who hadn't thought to build for the worst, were now struggling against the storm's unforgiving grasp. Conti's earth tunnel had become a sanctuary for more than just himself. Word had spread, and now families from nearby cabins sought shelter in the warmth of the earth, crowding into the small space. Though it was tight, there was enough room for everyone. Conti shared his firewood without hesitation, his actions reflecting the lessons he had learned from his elders. Survival comes from sharing, from unity, not from isolation. The others had been skeptical at first, but now they saw the value in what he had done. As he looked around the tunnel, crowded with people and families, Conti felt a sense of calm settle over him. His preparations had saved lives. The earth had given him not just shelter, but purpose. He had listened to its whispers, understood its language, and now he could feel the presence of his ancestors in the warmth that filled the space. But the storm wasn't finished. The winds had torn through the village, uprooting trees and collapsing structures. The worst of it would pass, but the land would be scarred and the struggle would continue. For Conti, the work was not done. He had built the tunnel, but now, as the storm's fury continued to rage, he could feel the earth urging him to do more. It was a call he could not ignore. He stepped outside again, the snow now knee-deep and heavy. The storm's intensity made it nearly impossible to see, but Conti had no fear. The land had never failed him. He moved through the snowdrifts with the same careful attention his father had taught him, understanding the rhythms of the storm as though it were another living thing. He reached the edge of the village and looked toward the horizon. The mountain, a towering presence in the distance, loomed like a silent guardian. Conti had always known that survival was tied to the land, and the mountain had always been a part of that, an ever-watchful presence that sheltered them, guided them, and protected them. The storm would pass, but Conti's connection to the earth and the mountain would remain, a bond as old as time itself. The storm's fury had begun to wane by the fourth day, but the land was still covered in a thick, unbroken blanket of snow. Conti stood at the entrance of the earth tunnel, his breath steaming in the cold air. The village had survived, and the earth tunnel had kept everyone safe, but Conti knew that the hardest days were not yet over. Supplies would need to be replenished, and more wood would have to be gathered to see them through the rest of the winter. Though the worst of the storm had passed, the land itself felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. Conti felt a pull deep within him, as if the earth was calling to him. It was a quiet whisper, a voice carried on the wind, urging him to step beyond the safety of the tunnel and into the world outside. The winds had calmed, and the snow, though deep, was no longer falling with the same intensity. Yet Kanti knew that the earth's warning was not just about the storm, it was about what lay ahead. As he stepped out into the stillness, he felt the presence of the spirits around him. His people had always known that the land was alive with spirit, that the earth itself carried wisdom passed down through generations. In moments like this, when the world seemed to hold its breath, Kanti could feel their presence more strongly than ever. The earth whispered to him again, a voice in his heart, a call to remember. It reminded him of the old teachings, of the importance of balance. His people had survived not by dominating nature, but by living in harmony with it. The earth had always been their protector, but it was a protector that required respect. And respect came from understanding that each season, each storm, each change in the wind had its own purpose. Kanti closed his eyes for a moment, letting the cold air wash over him, feeling the Spirit's message settle deep within him. He knew what needed to be done. The earth tunnel had kept them safe, but the land still had lessons to offer. The spirits were guiding him towards something more, a deeper understanding that would shape the days to come. He turned toward the village and began walking, each step deliberate, grounded in the wisdom of the land. He would teach the others what he had learned, that survival was not just about shelter, but about a way of life, about living in balance with the earth. As Kanti moved through the village, he called to the others. Slowly, they emerged from their cabins, faces weary but hopeful. The storm had passed, but the lessons of the earth were just beginning. It was time for Kanti to share his knowledge, to pass on the teachings that had saved them all. The earth, the spirits, and the land itself had spoken. Kanti had listened. Now it was time for the others to hear. The storm had passed, leaving the village in a world of quiet stillness. The snow had settled thickly over the land, creating a soft, frozen blanket that made every step seem a careful choice. Yet Kanti knew the work was far from done. The earth tunnel had provided safety and warmth, but now he needed to gather more firewood for the coming weeks. The supplies were running low, and despite the shelter it offered, the earth tunnel could only hold so much. Kanti glanced around at the others, still huddled close to their homes. The storm had tested their endurance, but now there was no time for hesitation. He had prepared them as best as he could, but the land's unforgiving winter was far from over. The need for firewood would not wait. With his shoulders squared and his mind set, Kanti grabbed his axe, feeling the weight of it in his hand. He knew the journey to the distant forest would not be easy. The wind had died down, but the cold still held tight to the land. It would be a difficult trek through the deep snow, but Kanti had done this before. He knew how to move through the land's obstacles, how to read the rhythm of nature, and how to respect its challenges. Before leaving, Kanti stood for a moment outside the earth tunnel, his gaze drifting to the distant forest. The trees, heavy with snow, stood as silent sentinels in the stillness. The path ahead would be long, and the trek would test his strength and resolve, but Kanti had no fear. He knew the earth would guide him, just as it had guided his ancestors through countless winters. As he began his journey, the snow reached up to his knees, making each step a struggle. The silence of the land, now broken only by the crunch of his footsteps, felt oppressive. Kanti moved carefully, trusting his instincts. His father's teachings echoed in his mind. Survival is not about haste. It is about listening to the land, respecting it. The forest was farther than he had remembered, and the journey seemed to stretch on endlessly. The cold bit through his clothing, and his breath came out in thick clouds. But he pushed forward, the promise of firewood keeping him focused. The earth, he reminded himself, would guide him through this. Hours passed before he reached the tree line. The sight of the tall pines, their branches heavy with snow, filled Kanti with a sense of calm. Here, in the forest, he would find what he needed. The wind had picked up again, but it was no longer the howling, blinding force it had been in the storm. Now, it was a quiet reminder of the land's power. As Kanti began to cut down the first tree, he felt a deep connection to the earth beneath him. This was the work of his ancestors, the knowledge passed down through generations that allowed him to survive, to live with the land rather than against it. The work would not be easy, but the rewards would sustain him. The snow continued to fall in thick, heavy sheets as Conti made his way back to the village, his arms laden with freshly cut firewood. The journey had been long, the cold relentless, but the forest had provided what he needed. The trees, their trunks standing like silent guardians in the snow, had given him their gifts. Now, with the firewood securely piled on his sled, he made the difficult journey back through the drifts. The trek back to the village was slower, the weight of the firewood dragging on the sled, but Conti felt a sense of fulfillment settle over him. The worst of the storm had passed, and he had gathered enough to last through the coming weeks. The village, still buried beneath the snow, seemed peaceful now, almost untouched by the storm's violence. As he entered the village, the familiar sight of the earth tunnel greeted him. It was a sanctuary now, a place of warmth and refuge, and Conti felt grateful once more for his decision to build it. He had known, even before the storm had come, that it would be the key to their survival. Inside, the fire would burn bright, its warmth radiating through the thick walls of earth, and the people would be safe. Conti carefully unloaded the firewood, stacking it inside the tunnel where it would remain dry and protected from the harsh weather. As the last of the wood was secured, Conti lit a small fire in the hearth. The crackling sound filled the tunnel, and he felt the warmth spread, a quiet hum of life in the otherwise still world. The fire was more than just a source of warmth, it was a heartbeat, the life force of the village. It kept them connected to the land and to each other, a symbol of survival. Conti thought of his people, their faces weary from the storm, their lives still touched by the memory of the struggle. They would rest tonight, safe in the warmth of the fire, but tomorrow they would rise again and face whatever challenges the land had in store. As the flames danced, Conti allowed himself to relax, the tension of the journey lifting from his shoulders. The cold outside was nothing compared to the warmth of the earth tunnel. He knew that his people had been given the gift of survival, not just from the storm, but from the teachings of the land, which had always provided. The fire was a reminder of that simple yet powerful, a force that would keep them going through the darkest nights. Conti looked around at the others now gathered inside the tunnel, their faces lit by the fire's glow. They were safe, they were warm, and they were together. The storm outside was a distant memory now, just another challenge overcome, but the heartbeat of the fire would carry them through the long, cold winter ahead. The winter stretched on, but Conti knew the worst was behind them. The earth tunnel had kept his people safe from the cold, its warmth now a symbol of their survival. Outside, the snow still blanketed the village, but inside, life continued as it always had. The fire burned brightly, its warmth filling the tunnel as families gathered together, finding comfort in each other's presence. The storm had tested them, but it had also brought them closer, united by the shelter Conti had built. As the days passed and the temperature gradually rose, Conti found himself reflecting on the path that had led him to this moment. The earth tunnel, once a simple idea, had proven to be more than just a shelter. It was a testament to the wisdom of his ancestors, to the lessons passed down through the generations about living in harmony with the land. It had been an act of patience, a slow, deliberate process that honored the earth's natural rhythm, and it had paid off in ways he had never expected. His people had learned much over the past few weeks. They had seen the power of the land, the way the earth could both give and protect. Conti had shared everything he knew with them, teaching them not just how to survive, but how to live with the land. They no longer saw the earth as something to be conquered, but as a partner, a guide, and a protector. It was a lesson that Conti had learned from his father, and now he was passing it on to the next generation. As the last of the winter storm melted away, Conti stood at the entrance of the earth tunnel, watching the snowdrift slowly recede. The village was quiet now, the land at rest, but Conti knew the cycle would begin again, and when it did, his people would be ready. They had learned to prepare not just for the immediate storm, but for whatever came next. The earth had given them a lesson they would never forget. The earth tunnel, now filled with the warmth of fire and laughter, stood as a lasting monument to survival. It was a simple structure, but it carried the weight of centuries of knowledge. As Conti stood there, he knew that this was not just a place of refuge, it was a legacy that would continue through the generations, carried forward by those who understood the wisdom of the land and the importance of living in balance with it. Conti turned away from the entrance, the warm glow of the fire at his back, and looked around at his people. The storm was over, but their work was just beginning. The legacy of the Earth Tunnel, of their connection to the land, would live on in the hearts of his people, a reminder that the greatest strength comes not from fighting nature, but from understanding it. And as long as they remembered the teachings of the earth, they would survive, thrive, and continue to honor the land that had always sustained them.